Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Total Biscuit. Sometimes we screw up. Sometimes we screw up again while trying to correct the screw up. That's the mark of a true professional, and by that I mean, oh god, I'm sorry. Don't talk about micro SD cards anymore is the lesson I've learned about this. So, earlier I put up what was a correction video about my Nintendo Switch assessment, and it was about the segment regarding the fact that the storage it uses is SD card based, at least outside of the fairly small 32 gig internal storage, which is some higher speed flash memory. And it was in regards to some mistakes that I'd made with my assessment of it when comparing it to hard drive speed, and also a few misconceptions some other people had about how the speed should be assessed. And then, in my correction video, I managed to screw that up as well. Wow, that was amazing. Yeah, this is what I get for depending too much on benchmarks and not fully understanding the technology. So, let me just issue this unmonetized video, or commentary, because there ain't no bloody video here, as a correction to the correction, and also a correction of the original video. So, during the Switch commentary, I stated that an SD card is slower than even a 5,400 RPM hard drive in some circumstances. Now, there's a few different ways to assess the speed of a storage device. One of those ways is to measure its ability to do sequential read and sequential write. That boils down to testing how fast it can read large files or write large files, generally into the same place. Hard drives are usually faster, most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time, versus SD cards. Here's the thing, when it comes to gameplay, when it comes to using those sort of applications, sequential read and write generally isn't all that relevant. Random read is the ability to read lots of little files that are scattered all over the place on the drive. And that is the sort of thing that happens much more often when dealing with video games. Now, when it comes to random read, SD cards are faster than hard drives in most circumstances, unless you get a really fast drive or a really slow SD card. So in that sense, I totally screwed up. Put my hands up there and admitting that. That was completely wrong. Sorry, I completely screwed that up. This morning I did a bit more research about it and discovered a little more about how data is used during video game operation. And what I discovered is that random write is actually also extremely important, at least on PC, with installed games at any rate. The data that's going in and out for various AAA video games, such as Battlefield 4, Titanfall, Watch Dogs, etc., actually indicated that for the most part there are more files written than there are read, and most of those files are pretty small and would count as random write files. This can affect the loading times of the game. These are things that are not necessarily cached within the RAM. You'd think that most of it would be, but apparently not. This was based on tests that were done by Gamers Nexus on various different titles, and I've put those results in the description below this video so you can read about how exactly that works. It's got all sorts of things about I/O, that being input-output requests and operations, and so on and so forth. The article, for the most part, is about how SSDs improve game performance, but it enlightened me somewhat as to how much the storage device is written to during gameplay. You wouldn't think that would necessarily affect loading times, clues in the name, load, right? But as it turns out, it actually can, which is why SSDs often provide a significant boost to loading times, because there is a ton of data being written as well as read, and the SSD is very, very good at random read and random write. SD cards, on the other hand, are pretty terrible when it comes to random write. They are not very fast at all and are outpaced by hard drives, even slower hard drives, as well as SSDs that crush them several hundred times over. They're getting better at it, but for the most part, they're pretty bad when it comes to that specific type of data writing. Here's the thing, this isn't actually relevant with the Nintendo Switch, which is why I managed to screw up again. I don't know how I managed to miss out on this, but the Nintendo Switch also has internal storage, which is much higher speed than an SD card, and it's very logical to suggest that it would use the internal storage, not the external storage, for those random write operations. As a result, the conclusion is that the SD card shouldn't really affect things like load times and performance all that much, if at all. It could if you end up getting a very, very slow one. There are a few people that posted a couple of personal tests using the 3DS when loading off of a cartridge game card versus loading off the SD card, and even tried a couple of different SD cards, and they saw in some situations a couple of seconds difference when it came to load times, and that may be exacerbated with the Switch, but it's pretty unlikely, and it looks like those random write operations will end up on the internal memory, not the external SD card. So consider this the correction to the original Switch video and the correction to the correction video, which ended up being technically correct, except it won't operate that way on the Switch. If it was a PC, then it may very well have ended up that way, but it's not, so that isn't really relevant. As for the other things that I said about SD cards in the video, I do stand by them, and let me provide a little bit of explanation as to that. At the moment, I don't think that SD card is a particularly good idea when dealing with a modern digital games console. I don't know if you can necessarily call the Switch that, but it is 2017 and you would expect digital distribution to be a very big factor with a new console. Considering that it is Nintendo, we don't know whether or not that's going to be the case. We have no idea how good or bad their online system is going to be. But the problem with SD cards is that in order to get them to the size of, say, a hard drive that you would find within a PlayStation 4 or an Xbox One, you are going to pay quite a lot of money if you want to get a high-quality SD card. Now, while I don't know exactly how many people would use the Switch as a media device, I would say that having a decent amount of storage is fairly important for that. And portable devices do tend to be used as media devices. It doesn't look like there's going to be any actual video services available on launch for the Switch, which is mind-boggling considering the number of other devices that have that support. But if it ends up being a media player for anybody, then they may very well have to spend quite a bit on a lot of storage if they're also using that particular device for downloading and storing digital games. That remains a concern. We may very well see the cost of high-quality SD cards go down, but the current situation with SD cards is a bit awkward, and there's a few reasons for that. Firstly, there are so many different types of SD cards and speeds of SD cards, it is confusing for the consumer. This is made all the worse by the fact that there's been a big race to the bottom with SD cards, and cheaper SD cards tend to be unreliable. In order to save money in this very low margin market, they're using cheaper and cheaper memory, and that usually results in unreliable performance and unreliable longevity. What compounds that even further is that there has been a flood in the past year or so of counterfeit SD cards. Stuff coming in from China that is way, way, way below spec. A lot of it is designed to look like, or indeed even sold as, a more reputable brand. And there have been reports all over the place of people getting counterfeit SD cards, even from reputable vendors such as Amazon. Now, SD cards are not inherently unreliable. The technology isn't designed to fail. However, with so many low-quality and counterfeit cards on the market, and very little knowledge in the hands of your average consumer when it comes to which brands to choose and which kind of cards to get, I have a feeling that quite a few people will end up buying duff cards. And that could end up being a problem for both Nintendo and for the consumer, as the device could get a reputation for unreliability. That is a speculation, but I do base it on a recent example that there were a flood of complaints online about the performance of GoPro cameras by your average consumer, and it turned out, of course, that said consumer had bought a low-quality or low-speed SD card without realizing that for that sort of reading and writing, they would need a much faster SD card. SD cards are classified in different ways. It used to be that the Class 10 card was the bee's knees, but these days, if you're looking for a nice quick card that can handle a lot of video recording, you're probably going to be looking at a UHS-2 or Ultra High Speed 2 card. I don't believe that all that many people are that well informed about the various speed standards available for SD cards, so I think there is a very real and realistic likelihood of confusion. That said, if you do buy a card from a reputable brand such as, say, SanDisk that offers a lifetime warranty, I wouldn't expect that you're going to have too many problems with it. And even if you do, you're going to be able to get it replaced. My concern is that the kind of people that are going to fall into the trap of buying either a counterfeit or slow card are not the sort of people that listen to a gaming channel like this. They're probably just kids and regular families who are, of course, the target market of Nintendo products a lot of the time. It's a concern, but I wouldn't want that misconstrued, and let's be honest, that's kind of my fault for not properly explaining myself, as assuming that all SD cards are inherently unreliable. They are not. They weren't really designed for long-term data retention, but they're not going to break every 5 minutes. Please don't assume that, as long as you buy a solid, reputable brand. Now, if you don't mind, I've had far too many slices of humble pie today, and I think I'm going to throw up. No, seriously, it's my own fault. I'm really sorry about that. I should have done my research better. I misread the data, I misunderstood it. That was my fault, and hopefully it won't happen again. I'll try and stay away from those topics that I'm not so sure about in future. I don't want to mislead people, and I certainly don't want to damage the prospects of an upcoming product through misinformation. That's not fair, that's unprofessional, and I apologize to everybody for that. Thank you very much for watching, folks, and I'll see you next time.